It was the summer of 1941, and the thunder of German artillery echoed across the vast plains of the Soviet Union. Operation Barbarossa, Hitler's audacious invasion of the East, had begun. Within weeks, the Wehrmacht's advance had cut deep into Russian territory, and by September, the elegant city of Pushkin, just outside Leningrad, fell to the German army. Inside the Catherine Palace lay one of Europe's greatest artistic treasures, the Amber Room, a dazzling chamber of gold leaf, mirrors and sculpted amber panels that shimmered like sunlight frozen in stone. Constructed in the early 18th century, the Amber Room had been a gift from Prussia's Frederick William the Femme to Tsar Peter the Great, a symbol of friendship between two rising empires. But as history would twist, that same alliance would crumble, and the treasure's fate would be rewritten in fire and war. Measuring over 170 square feet and containing more than 6 tons of carved amber, the room's panels had become one of the Soviet Union's proudest cultural relics. Yet in 1941, as German troops marched toward Leningrad, its beauty became its curse. Soviet curators at the Catherine Palace, led by the art historian Anatoly Kuchumov, tried desperately to dismantle and hide the Amber Room before the Germans arrived. But the amber panels, brittle with age and bonded to the walls, began to crack under the strain. It was as if the room refused to be moved, one curator later recalled. So, in a desperate measure, they covered the gleaming panels with wallpaper, hoping the invaders might overlook them. It was a futile gesture. When soldiers of the 1st Infantry Division of the Wehrmacht entered the palace, they immediately recognized what they had found. Within days, officers from the Kunstschutz, the Nazi art protection unit tasked with securing valuable cultural property, arrived to catalogue the treasure. Among them was Alfred Rode, a German art historian from Königsberg, and one of the men who would oversee its removal. Under orders from the Reich's main art repository in Berlin, Rode and his team carefully dismantled the panels, labeling and packing them into 27 crates. In less than 36 hours, the Amber Room, a masterpiece that had stood for over 2 centuries, was gone. Trucks bearing the crates departed Pushkin in early October 1941, escorted by Wehrmacht guards, their destination, Königsberg Castle in East Prussia, the historic heart of the Teutonic Order. There, the Amber Room would be displayed as a symbol of Germany's cultural restoration, reclaiming what Nazi propaganda claimed was originally Prussian art. When the crates arrived, Rode personally supervised the reassembly. By January 1942, the Amber Room once again gleamed under electric lights, now behind glass panels for public viewing in a city untouched by war, at least for the moment. British intelligence, monitoring the Nazi looting operations through intercepted communications and aerial reconnaissance, took note. The British Air Ministry's intelligence reports listed Königsberg Castle as a site of cultural significance under German protection. Still, Allied command was focused elsewhere: the bombing campaigns over the Ruhr and later, the Atlantic convoys. The Amber Room was far down the list of military targets. For now, it remained safe, on display for Nazi officials, party elites, and visiting dignitaries. But as the war dragged on and tides turned against the Reich, Königsberg's quiet halls began to fill with anxiety. By late 1943, Soviet forces were regaining ground on the Eastern Front. The Reichsministerium für Volksaufklärung und Propaganda, the Ministry of Propaganda, ordered that all cultural treasures in vulnerable areas be evacuated or secured. Alfred Rode, now custodian of the Amber Room, received direct instructions from Berlin to dismantle and crate the panels once more. But moving them now was not as easy as before. Supply lines were strained, the railways overloaded, and Allied bombers prowled the skies. Rode began preparing the Amber Room for transport. Wooden crates were marked, inventories drafted, and a small SS detachment assigned to oversee the operation. Yet as 1944 arrived, the crates remained in the castle's cellars, waiting for safe passage that never came. In August, RAF bombers launched devastating air raids on Königsberg, destroying much of the old city. The castle survived barely, but the museum's galleries were shattered. According to later reports, the Amber Room's crates were moved deeper into the castle's vaults for safekeeping. In the chaos of collapsing fronts, the fate of those crates would soon vanish into legend. The last confirmed sighting of the Amber Room came from Rode himself, who wrote in his diary, "All measures taken for protection. The panels are in secure storage. Further instructions awaited. That note was dated January 12, 1945, just weeks before the Soviet army encircled Königsberg. As the Red Army closed in, fires, panic, and conflicting orders consumed the city. The Amber Room, once the pride of empires, would soon disappear without a trace, swallowed by the final fury of war. The mystery was only beginning. Winter 1942. Deep within the cold stone walls of Königsberg Castle, the Amber Room shimmered once again, an improbable island of beauty in a world drowning in conflict. Under soft museum lights, its golden panels radiated warmth across the grand hall as visitors in German uniforms filed past. For the Nazis, the Amber Room was more than art. It was propaganda, a symbol of reclaimed heritage, proof that Germany's cultural destiny had been restored from the Slavic East. Alfred Rode, the curator and guardian of the treasure, meticulously kept records of every panel and sculpture. He noted its fragility, the amber darkening from humidity, the adhesives weakening under age. Yet to the visiting officers of the Wehrmacht, none of that mattered. The room was a prize, proof of victory in the East. On the surface, Königsberg thrived under wartime discipline, its citizens obedient and proud. But beneath that veneer, the tide of the war was already beginning to turn. Far beyond East Prussia, Allied reconnaissance had begun mapping Germany's art repositories. The Monuments and Fine Arts section in London compiled intelligence on stolen cultural assets, coordinating with the RAF's Bombing Analysis Division. In January 1943, aerial photographs of Königsberg revealed the castle complex intact, its central hall roof reinforced, perhaps to shield something valuable. Yet, despite knowing Allied command had no interest in precision strikes for art, the war demanded results: factories, shipyards, fuel depots. The Amber Room would have to wait. Meanwhile, on the Eastern Front, the Battle of Stalingrad raged. News of the German Sixth Army's encirclement spread through Königsberg like a chill wind. For Rode, the handwriting on the wall was clear: defeat would come eventually. He began quietly drafting contingency plans for evacuation. In his notes, later found by Soviet investigators, he wrote, "All artistic treasures must be crated for transport westward. Priority, amber panels, awaiting railway clearance." But trains were scarce and routes were perilous. Partisan sabotage and Allied bombings had crippled supply lines from East Prussia to Berlin. The Amber Room remained in the castle, wrapped in protective linen and sealed within its hall as air raid sirens grew more frequent. On August 27, 1944, the RAF's Bomber Command launched Operation Hurricane, a night raid targeting Königsberg's industrial districts. The city burned for 3 days, hundreds died, flames lit the Baltic horizon, and the castle's roof caught fire. Yet miraculously, the central museum wings survived the worst. Rode and his staff rushed to the vaults at dawn, ensuring the crates of amber and gold leaf remained intact. In Berlin, orders became frantic. The Reichsleiter Rosenberg Task Force, responsible for looted art across occupied Europe, instructed regional commanders to move valuables to the Reich's heartland or into secure mines and tunnels. By late 1944, thousands of crates had already been shipped from Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Austria into underground storage sites like Altersee in Austria and Merkers in Germany. But Königsberg was cut off. The advancing Red Army had severed land routes, and the Baltic Sea was increasingly controlled by Soviet submarines. Rode's last request for transport authorization was denied in December 1944. As the noose tightened, fear took hold. Soviet artillery could now be heard from the outskirts of East Prussia. The once proud museum halls were deserted, their collections packed away in basements. Still, records show that Rode continued to visit the Amber Room almost daily, perhaps out of duty, perhaps obsession. Witnesses later recalled seeing him descend into the vaults with his assistant, Dr. Mittig, late into the night, reviewing crates by lamplight. "It must not fall into their hands," he told one caretaker, referring to the Soviets. "Better it is lost to fire than to vengeance." By January 1945, the last civilian evacuations from Königsberg were underway. The Baltic ports of Pillau and Gotenhafen overflowed with refugees. The Kriegsmarine's Operation Hannibal began, one of the largest sea evacuations in history, moving hundreds of thousands of Germans westward. Yet no record mentions any cargo matching the Amber Room among those manifests. Some researchers believe Rode planned to move the treasure aboard one of these convoys, but failed to secure passage before the front collapsed. On January 29, 1945, the first Soviet shells struck Königsberg. Rhodes' diary entry stopped. Days later, the castle was bombed again, its upper floors destroyed, the museum engulfed in smoke. When Soviet troops entered the ruins months later, they found only charred remnants of amber and glass. Whether these belonged to the original Amber Room or were fragments of decorative replicas remains unknown. For the British and American intelligence officers monitoring the region, the reports were puzzling. No confirmed transport, no surviving inventory, only silence from a city now reduced to rubble. The once proud Amber Room, catalogued, photographed, and displayed for the Reich's glory, had vanished into the chaos of war's final act. And yet, as later testimonies hinted, not all those crates may have been lost within Königsberg's walls. Rumors began to circulate of a secret convoy, a hidden tunnel, a desperate attempt to spirit the treasure away before the Soviet onslaught. Those whispers would ignite one of the greatest treasure hunts in modern history. The chase for the Amber Room was far from over. Spring 1945. The once proud city of Königsberg was now a graveyard of ash and broken stone. Soviet artillery had reduced the Prussian capital to ruins, and its centuries-old castle, once home to kings, scholars, and treasures, smoldered beneath a haze of smoke and dust. In the chaos of collapsing fronts and fleeing civilians, one of the world's greatest masterpieces simply vanished. The Amber Room, last seen sealed in crates in the castle's vaulted cellars, disappeared without record or trace. When the Red Army captured Königsberg in April 1945, the Soviet 11th Guards Army, under the command of General Ivan Chernyakhovsky, entered the shattered city with orders to secure the palace and recover any cultural property. Soviet troops, accompanied by NKVD units and cultural officers, searched the wreckage of the Catherine Palace's lost twin. The looted treasures of the East were to be reclaimed. But in Königsberg they found only ruins. The castle's upper floors had been obliterated by bombing and fire. Its basements, once a labyrinth of archives, were flooded, charred, and blocked by rubble. Anatoly Kuchumov, the same curator who had once tried to save the Amber Room in 1941, now returned as part of the Soviet Commission on Restitution. He combed through the remains of the museum cellars, guided by German prisoners who had once served under Alfred Rode. Among the ashes, he found melted amber fragments fused with plaster and charred wood. Evidence, perhaps that the panels had been destroyed, but Kuchumov was not convinced. The fragments were too few, the burn patterns inconsistent. Something didn't add up. In Berlin, Allied intelligence was facing its own mysteries. The British Combined Intelligence Objectives Subcommittee, CIOS, and the American Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archives program, the so-called Monuments Men, had begun cataloguing reports of missing artwork. Among the hundreds of thousands of stolen pieces was a singular entry marked Amber Room, Pushkin. Last seen Königsberg Castle, January 1945. Field agents in occupied Germany followed the trail through surviving Reich archives, interrogating captured Nazi officials and curators. But even Alfred Rode, the man who knew most, could no longer speak. He and his wife had died of illness in a refugee camp only weeks after Königsberg's fall. Still, rumors persisted. A member of the Volkssturm claimed to have seen trucks leaving the castle courtyard in February, escorted by SS guards under orders from the Gauleiter of East Prussia, Erich Koch. The vehicles, he said, headed west under the cover of night. Koch, one of the most ruthless Nazi administrators, had controlled the region with an iron hand and access to private transport. Could he have sent the Amber Room away before the Soviet encirclement? Koch was captured by British forces in Hamburg later that year, but under interrogation, he denied any knowledge of the treasure's fate. The Führer's property, he called it, was none of my concern. Meanwhile, in the smouldering ruins of the castle, Soviet engineers uncovered sealed corridors leading to deeper subcellars, rooms untouched by the initial fires. But before full excavation could begin, Soviet command ordered the demolition of what remained of Königsberg Castle, viewing it as a symbol of German militarism. Whatever secrets lay buried beneath its foundations were sealed again under tons of concrete and rubble. The site would later become part of modern-day Kaliningrad. In the years immediately following the war, conflicting accounts muddied the truth. Some witnesses claimed to have seen the amber room crates loaded aboard a ship in the Baltic port of Pillau, bound for Germany. Others spoke of a train derailed near Weimar, its contents seized by the SS and later burned. Allied naval records list several ships sunk by Soviet submarines in early 1945 during Operation Hannibal. Among them the Wilhelm Gustloff and the Karlsruhe. When the wreck of the Karlsruhe was rediscovered off the coast of Poland decades later, divers found crates of military equipment and artifacts, though none matching the amber room's description. Still, the possibility that it had been lost at sea became one of the most persistent theories. In a declassified 1946 report, a British intelligence officer wrote, "Evidence suggests the amber room was crated and removed from Königsberg prior to the Soviet assault. Its ultimate destination remains undetermined." The US counterpart, in a 1947 Monuments Men file, concluded bluntly, "Presumed destroyed by fire. Probability of survival minimal." Yet even that was not the end. Whispers began to circulate through post-war Europe. A former SS officer, captured near Lübeck, claimed that several crates of amber panels had been transferred via rail to Thuringia in early 1945. The same region later found to house vast underground storage tunnels filled with Nazi loot. The Americans who liberated the area discovered gold, paintings, and entire archives, but no trace of amber or gilded mosaics. Was it a fabrication, or another fragment of truth buried under too many lies? By the end of 1945, the amber room's official status was missing. To the Soviets, it had been destroyed by German barbarism, a symbol of cultural theft beyond redemption. To Western investigators, it was one of countless mysteries lost in the fog of a dying Reich. Yet among the ashes of Königsberg, stories lingered of sealed rooms, lost convoys, and treasures that refused to die with the war. The disappearance of the amber room had become more than a question of art. It was now a question of truth itself. And in the fractured world that emerged from World War II, truth would prove far more elusive than gold. Summer 1946. Europe lay in ruins, divided, exhausted, and haunted by what it could not find. As victors sifted through the rubble of Hitler's Reich, a new kind of operation began: the hunt for stolen art. Under the leadership of the Allied Monuments, Fine Arts and Archives program, the Monuments Men, officers from Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union scoured mines, castles, and salt caverns to recover what the Nazis had taken. They unearthed Michelangelo sculptures, Rembrandt paintings, and crates of gold from beneath Alpine peaks. But one treasure, more mysterious than all the rest, remained missing: the amber room. In the charred ruins of Königsberg, Soviet forces launched their own recovery mission. The NKVD and Soviet Art Committee assigned special investigator Anatoly Kuchumov to trace the stolen masterpiece. He worked under direct orders from Moscow, tasked with producing proof of either recovery or destruction. Yet every lead turned into smoke. German prisoners, questioned at length, repeated the same stories. The crates had been moved, hidden, burned, or sunk. No two accounts matched. Soviet reports became riddled with contradictions, some even accusing German officers of deliberate deception. Still, Kuchumov pressed on. In one chilling discovery, investigators uncovered Rhodes' remaining documents: handwritten notes referencing the amber room's evacuation order in late 1944. Attached to them was a map of Königsberg Castle's subcellars with one section marked Sonderlager, or special storage. When Kuchumov's team excavated the area, they found only blackened stone and molten glass. Laboratory analysis later confirmed traces of amber, but not in the volume that could account for the room's entirety. If fire had consumed it, where were the rest of the tons of amber, gold leaf, and marble? Meanwhile, in the British and American zones, Allied intelligence was conducting its own investigation. The British Control Commission in Germany, under Colonel Geoffrey Webb, documented Nazi art transfers between 1944 and 1945. Among the seized files from the Reich Ministry for the occupied Eastern Territories was an order signed by Erich Koch, Gauleiter of East Prussia, authorizing priority evacuation of cultural assets from Königsberg. The documents date January 31st, 1945, just days before Soviet encirclement. For British analysts, it suggested a narrow window during which the Amber Room could have been moved. But to where? One promising clue came from US Army intelligence, officers operating in the Harz Mountains of central Germany. There, the Monument's men had uncovered vast underground repositories, hidden tunnels containing thousands of paintings, archives, and sculptures. Major Ronald Edmund Balfour, a British art historian serving with the MFAA, noted in his journal, "If any high-value cargo left Königsberg, this is where it would be sent, the Reich's final vault." Yet after months of searching the mines at Merkers, Ransbach, and Altaussee, no trace of the Amber Room appeared. Even more confusing were the Soviet and Western rivalries that emerged. The dawn of the Cold War turned cooperation into competition. Each side suspected the other of concealing discoveries. British files mention Soviet secrecy in Kaliningrad, formerly Königsberg, where excavations were abruptly halted by military authorities. Soviet archives later revealed that some recovered fragments, gilded moldings and mosaic stones were quietly shipped to Moscow, stored under classification top secret, cultural losses of imperial value. To the public, the USSR declared the Amber Room destroyed. Privately, doubts persisted. As months turned to years, the case became an obsession for art historians and intelligence officers alike. In 1949, a report from the US Office of Strategic Services, OSS, Art Looting Investigation Unit noted, multiple rumors persist regarding transfer by sea. Allied naval intelligence had logged several late-war evacuations from East Prussian ports, Pillau, Gotenhafen, and Swinemünde, involving merchant vessels commandeered by the Kriegsmarine. The cargo manifests, fragmentary and coded, referenced art crates and special cargo. Among the ships listed was the Karlsruhe, sunk by Soviet aircraft on April 12, 1945, off the coast of Poland. It would take over 70 years for divers to rediscover the wreck and confirm that indeed crates of German origin still lay within. But at the time, the lead went cold. Kuchumov continued his work through the 1950s, comparing witness statements, reconstructing timelines, and interviewing former German museum staff now living under Allied supervision. One former museum guard, Karl Hoffmann, insisted he saw the crates moved by truck to the city's Schlossberg tunnels under SS command. Another claimed the crates were loaded onto rail cars headed toward Weimar. Both men later retracted their testimonies under pressure. Soviet files from this period, later declassified in the 1990s, reveal frustration from investigators, who complained of obstruction, concealment, and British interference. The truth was now entangled in politics. For the Monument's men, the search symbolized the moral duty to restore what war had stolen. For the Soviets, it was a matter of national pride, proof that Nazi barbarism had destroyed Russia's heritage. For the British and Americans, it was increasingly a riddle lost to history. Each report ended the same way: fate unknown. By the early 1950s, the official narrative hardened. The Amber Room had perished in the flames of Königsberg Castle. Yet, even as the world moved on, quiet rumors persisted in the intelligence corridors of London and Washington. Classified memos hinted that not all crates from Königsberg had been accounted for. A handful of them, marked with the same serial codes used by Rhodes' staff, appeared in post-war shipping manifests near Lübeck and Hamburg. But every trail led to missing ships, destroyed trains, or dead men. The war had ended, but the mystery was only deepening. And as Europe began to rebuild, the Amber Room's fate remained buried, perhaps beneath the ruins of Königsberg, or beneath the lies that followed it. The treasure had become a ghost of history, one that refused to rest. By the 1950s, the Cold War had begun, and Europe was a continent divided, not just by ideology, but by secrets. Amid the post-war reconstruction, the Amber Room lingered in the collective imagination of historians, collectors, and intelligence agencies alike. What had survived the fall of Königsberg? What had been lost at sea? burned in cellars, or deliberately concealed. The lines between fact, rumor, and political manipulation were increasingly blurred. British intelligence, operating through MI6's Art and Cultural section, received reports suggesting that some crates of the Amber Room had been moved westward, possibly through Baltic ports. In 1951, a retired Luftwaffe officer living in Hamburg claimed that, in the final days of the Third Reich, several trucks loaded with gilded panels had been escorted under heavy SS protection to Pillau harbour. From there, the officer alleged, the cargo was placed aboard a ship bound for Lübeck, a port controlled by the British occupation zone. Yet when investigators cross-checked shipping records, no vessel's log could confirm the Amber Room's passage. Every lead seemed to dissolve into uncertainty. Across the Atlantic, American intelligence monitored these developments with cautious interest. Agents from the CIA's predecessor, the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, had compiled extensive dossiers on Nazi-looted art. Analysts noted coded correspondence from the Reich Ministry for the occupied Eastern Territories referencing special cargo from Königsberg in January 1945. The documents were fragmentary and cryptic, but they suggested the possibility that the Amber Room, or parts of it, had survived beyond East Prussia. Was it hidden in private estates, buried in remote forests, or transported further south to Germany's mines? The documents provided no answers, only questions. Meanwhile, Soviet investigators maintained their own narrative. Official reports claimed the Amber Room had been destroyed in the Königsberg bombings, framing it as a symbol of German recklessness and brutality. Yet confidential archival files, declassified decades later, hinted at internal contradictions. Some Soviet officers insisted that fragments of amber, gilded moldings, and decorative panels had been recovered and secretly transported to Moscow. Orders classified as top secret indicate that the recovered pieces were stored in hidden warehouses, with access restricted to only a handful of senior cultural officials. If true, the Amber Room might not have been entirely lost, only concealed from the world, a tantalizing possibility that fueled speculation for decades. The Cold War further complicated the picture. Information sharing between the Western Allies and the Soviet Union was minimal. When British investigators attempted to access post-war transport records in East Germany, Soviet authorities denied entry. Western experts were forced to rely on fragmentary testimony from German civilians and former SS personnel. Some recounted seeing the crates in obscure rail depots. Others swore they had witnessed them loaded into bombed-out warehouses in Poland. Every account contradicted another, creating a tangled web of rumor and conjecture. By the 1960s, amateur treasure hunters and journalists began following leads across Europe. Expeditions into abandoned castles, tunnels, and sunken ships became increasingly common. Some claimed to have found small amber fragments or gilded carvings, but nothing matched the scale or artistry of the Amber Room panels documented in 1941. In Berlin, rumors circulated that certain Nazi officials had personally secreted away parts of the treasure to private collections, only to die before revealing their locations. The passage of time made verification nearly impossible. Historians debated the lessons of the Amber Room's disappearance. One theory emphasized the hubris of the Nazis. Their obsession with cultural plunder blinded them to practical realities, leaving treasures exposed to destruction. Another suggested that the chaos of retreat and collapse meant that fate, rather than deliberate concealment, had claimed the room. Yet no evidence definitively proved either claim. As British historian Sir Anthony Blunt once wrote in an unpublished lecture, "The Amber Room is not just missing, it is a mirror reflecting the disorder, greed, and desperation of the final months of the Third Reich." Even within intelligence circles, the Amber Room became emblematic of wartime secrets that refused to surface. MI6 files from 1965 reference a lost convoy hypothesis, speculating that the panels had been shipped to neutral Sweden or buried along the Baltic coastline, only to vanish when ships were sunk or records destroyed. The Soviets, meanwhile, insisted the room was gone, leaving the West to wonder whether Moscow might be withholding information. By the end of the decade, the Amber Room had become more than a historical artifact. It had become a legend. It was a treasure that existed in fragments, some physical, some in memory, and some in speculation. Each discovery, rumor, or dead-end report seemed to confirm only one truth: that the Amber Room's disappearance was not just a story of war, but a story of human ambition, secrecy, and the enduring mystery of history itself. Even today, scholars debate its fate. A missing masterpiece whose golden panels, intricate amber mosaics, and gilded moldings continue to haunt the imagination. The question remains, was the Amber Room truly destroyed, or does it lie hidden somewhere, waiting to be rediscovered? The answer, as it has for decades, continues to elude historians, intelligence agencies, and treasure hunters alike. The 1970s marked a new chapter in the saga of the Amber Room, as global curiosity and scholarly investigation rekindled the search for the lost masterpiece. Historians, journalists, and amateur treasure hunters scoured Europe from the ruins of Königsberg to remote mines in Austria and Germany. Each lead promised revelation but delivered frustration. From sunken ships in the Baltic Sea to forgotten tunnels beneath former East Prussia, the trail seemed endless, tangled in wartime chaos and decades of political secrecy. In the Soviet Union, archives that had remained classified during the Cold War slowly began to surface in the 1980s and 1990s. Declassified, documents revealed that some panels and fragments had indeed been recovered by Soviet forces, though the records were vague, often contradictory, and carefully sanitized for public release. Moscow's official stance remained firm. The Amber Room had been destroyed in the final days of the war. Yet historians noted anomalies. Fragments of amber and gold appeared in unexpected locations, hints of possible cover-ups. Could it be that portions of the treasure survived but were never revealed? Western efforts to locate the Amber Room continued in parallel. German archival investigations, along with new explorations of wartime shipping logs and railway manifests, offered tantalizing possibilities. Several late-war transport operations, some involving the Kriegsmarine evacuating East Prussia, were identified as potential avenues for the treasure's escape. Ships like the Wilhelm Gustloff and Karlsruhe, sunk in the Baltic in early 1945, fueled speculation that the Amber Room may have been lost to the sea. Yet dives into the wrecks and investigations of the surrounding maritime records found only fragments of furniture, crates, and military equipment, but nothing that could conclusively be linked to the room. Cultural memory of the Amber Room, however, proved resilient. In 1979, a painstaking reconstruction project began at the Catherine Palace in Pushkin, Russia, using photographs, design schematics, and surviving fragments. Completed in 2003, the recreated Amber Room stands as a testament to what was lost, and what may still exist somewhere, hidden from the world. The reconstruction captures the original room's grandeur, but it also underscores the enduring mystery. The originals remain missing. International intrigue only compounded the enigma. From the 1990s onward, theories proliferated. Some suggested the Amber Room had been spirited west into Germany and hidden in private estates or underground bunkers. Others speculated it had been smuggled into neutral countries like Switzerland or Sweden, exchanged or sold in the chaotic post-war black market. Still others held that Soviet authorities may have retained portions for secrecy, potentially to prevent embarrassment over lost cultural property. Every hypothesis has its proponents and skeptics, but none provide conclusive evidence. For historians, the Amber Room is a symbol not only of artistic achievement, but of the fragility of cultural heritage in times of war. It reminds us that human ambition, greed, and the chaos of conflict can erase even the most spectacular creations. Yet, it also inspires relentless inquiry. The meticulous cataloguing of Nazi-looted art, the post-war efforts of the Monument's Men, and modern archival research all stem from the same desire to reclaim history, to find truth where so much has been obscured. Even in 2025, the Amber Room continues to capture imaginations. Its story is not merely one of gold and amber, but of strategy, secrecy, and the human dimensions of war. Each year, new leads, archival discoveries, and diving expeditions ignite hope that perhaps the treasure has survived, hidden away, sealed in a forgotten tunnel, or submerged beneath the Baltic waves. The chase endures, a testament to the enduring power of history's mysteries. And so, the final question remains unanswered. Was the Amber Room destroyed in Königsberg, lost at sea, or secretly concealed in a location still unknown? Its fate embodies the enduring uncertainty of war, the intersection of ambition and chaos, and the allure of a mystery that refuses to fade. In the search for the Amber Room, historians, treasure hunters, and governments alike are united by one truth. Some stories, no matter how much time passes, never truly end. The Amber Room remains missing, and in that absence, it continues to haunt the annals of World War II, a golden enigma waiting to be rediscovered.